Welcome everyone. Let's start. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's online panel. On behalf of Pengon, Friends of the Earth Palestine, and the Henrichville Stiftang, Palestine and Jordan, would like to thank you all for joining us in this online panel. My name is Abedelrahman, the coordinator of Pengon. I work for Pengon in coordinating lobbying and environmental campaigns. This online panel is organized through a project implemented by Pengon in cooperation with the Henrichville Palestine and Jordan office. This project aimed to advocate for environmental rights in Palestine at the international level. Through this project, we have targeted the environmental activists and the human rights defenders in a capacity building program, and also we've produced and worked on several lobbying materials. So through this project, we've covered a wide of topics such as climate justice in Palestine, Palestinian rights to land, natural resources and and the rights in clean environment. And also we've highlighted the occupations exploitation of Palestinian natural resources in focus on gas and other fossil fuel. Welcome again, and excuse me to introduce Dr. Bettina Marks, the head of office Henrichville Stiftang Ramallah since 2015, and excuse me to give her special thanks for her efforts and for her fingerprint in environmental and social work in Palestine. Welcome, Dr. Bettina, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abir. Thank you very much. The very kind words. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this important evening, this webinar. I'm really happy to see you all. We have a program in our work here in Palestine and Jordan, which is called Environmental Justice. And Nidal Atalla, that you can also see on the screen, is the program coordinator for this program. And from the name of the program, Environmental Justice, you can see what we aim to do. We don't want to just only draw the attention to environmental topics, but we want to create actually the link between environment and justice, and the need that Palestinians will get the right to reach their resources, to have a fair share in their resources, and to have a clean environment. So I think this is really important, and I'm very happy that today we can join forces here, and we have with us experts from the field of justice and from the field of environment who will join forces tonight and will inform us about this very important topic. So I want to thank the speakers of this evening, Dr. Abedelrahman Tamimi, who I can already see on the screen. Hi. Dr. Susan Power of Al-Haq, who I can also see. Hi, Susan. And Naomi from Gastivists, who is an activist and bringing also the perspective of the activists into this discussion. So thank you all for being with us. I don't want to take any more of our time. I think we should start right away. So I wish us all a fruitful webinar and an interesting evening. And back to you, Abir.
Thank you, Bettina. Today, through this panel titled by Energy Annexation, Israel's illegal exploitations of Palestinian fossil fuel resources. This panel will address Israel's theft and exploitation of Palestinian natural resources, mainly gas and oil, and highlight the gravity of violations according to the international human rights and humanitarian law. Through this panel, we will raise two energy projects of common interest of the EU and discuss it from environmental and human rights angles. Excuse me to welcome the main speakers in this panel, Dr. Abedelrahman Tamimi, Naomi Kreitman, and Dr. Susan Power. Just an organizing point before we get started, if you have any questions during the presentations, please time them into the chat box and I will bring them up during the time for the questions at the end. Now we will start this panel with Dr. Tamimi, the chairperson of Pengon. He will raise the Israel exploitation of Palestinian natural resources, mainly gas, and will give us a full image about the conflict on natural gas in the Mediterranean. Dr. Abedelrahman Tamimi is the chairperson of Pengon and the director of Palestinian Hydrology Group. Since graduation, Dr. Tamimi has worked in the field of NGOs in occupied territories. During the last 30 years, activities focused on water resources and integrated rural development and community development. Dr. Tamimi is a lecturer at Al-Quds University in the field of sustainable development and the Arab American University in the field of strategic planning and fundraising. Also, he is a co-author of the report prepared for the EU entitled Mediterranean Challenges 2030. So please, Dr. Tamimi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abir, and good evening for everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to share with you this evening and some ideas. And really, I have pleasure also to join the panel with Dr. Suzanne and Naomi. And thanks for Bettina also to join us this evening because really it's an important topic, and we're here to share ideas how to proceed with lobbying to protect the Palestinian natural resources. Abir, how many minutes I have? 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
10 till 15, yes.
10 to 15, okay. Hours or minutes? Okay. First of all, I will give you a background about the natural resources in Palestine, mainly the petroleum and natural gas, and the drilling happened during the history in Palestine, and very quick. During the British mandate, the British government or the mandate government drilled two wells, one in Halhul village and one close to Birzeit village, and to see the reserve or the potentiality of finding petroleum or oil or anything. And there is no information released about the results of this drilling. And also the British company continued to drill and to do geological and geophysical survey during Jordanian time till 1967. And they did the British company, they did a full geological survey to all West Bank, and nothing done in Gaza, of course, in marine or in land. After that, during the Israeli time, and the Israelis, they did two exploratory wells, one in Rantis and one close to West Bank, but inside the Green Line. And the Israelis also, they did heavily in geophysical and geological investigation close to the coast, Israeli coast and Gaza coast. That's what I'm trying to say is the investigation about gas or petroleum or other crude oil, what we call it crude oil, actually started early time. And the Israelis recently, they intensified the investigation, especially close to Haifa coast and close to Gaza coast. the other thing is the Israelis, they don't consider the Palestinians as a state. That's why they don't recognize the marine borders, or they don't recognize even the land border. For example, when they drilled the well in Rantis, they don't care about the so-called Green Line or the borders of 1967, or even the buffer zone between Israel and Palestine, which we call it mandate line. Actually, the Israelis, they don't recognize the Palestinian borders yet. The other thing is important to mention. At the beginning of 2018, when the Mediterranean, especially East Mediterranean countries, established the Mediterranean Gas Council, Israel refused to give the right to Palestinians to be a member for this council, but because they don't recognize Palestine as a state, but because pressures of some Arab countries and some other European countries, and Israel realized at the end to enter the Arab market, the Palestinians should be a member of the council. That's why the Israelis accepted and extended invitation to the Palestinians to attend the second meeting of the Natural Gas Council. I'm saying this information because it's important to understand the political frame of the natural resources management or petroleum gas management in the Mediterranean area, in land or in the marine. Just to give you a background about the Israelis' investigations and Israelis' activities in the Mediterranean close to Gaza, the Israelis, they consider or they actually they give names to two major petroleum and gas fields, mainly gas field. The first one is Marine 1 and Marine 2, and we call it Gaza Marine, and they call it Marine only. And also they have other activities inside the sea, like Itamar and other wells of the Israelis. The problem is here, it's very important. The Israelis, they don't recognize the Palestinian marine borders. Where is it? And if you see the map of the gas, or what they call it, economic zone, or Gaza economic zone, it is like a triangle, and this is not actually recognized by international law. What is the criteria to have this borders? We don't know. Anyhow, many Israelis, just to mention, where is the problem here? The problem is the Israelis, they don't give the Gaza people, I will come to the action of the Palestinian Authority later, but they don't give the Gaza people or even the Palestinian Authority the right to know what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean. They don't release information, or they don't exchange information with Palestinians or with other Arab countries. You know, there is a problem, ongoing problem between Israel and Lebanon and Syria. They have nothing to say with Israelis, but Lebanon, they started indirect negotiations with Israelis. What I'm trying to say is still there is a problem between Palestine, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, and other countries, Cyprus, about the borders. Where is the borders? Where is the national right of each country? Still, this is under discussion and on the table. The other issue which is important is the gas is not, I'm geologist by background. The gas is different from the oil or from the petroleum. The petroleum, you cannot attract it to other areas. You cannot withdraw it to other areas from a physico-chemistry characteristic point of view. While the gas, it's easy to be withdrawn from other area from one field to another. That's the difference. That's why we are worried that the Israelis, they are gaining time to to take the Palestinian gas, especially from Gaza Marine. The other issue which I don't want to go in very technicality of these issues things. The one thing is despite the fact that the Palestinian Authority and the Israel are a member of the Mediterranean Gas Council, Israel refused to release any information, accurate information to Palestinians. And to have access to the information, what's going on, what's the reserve, what is the activities there, and other things, technical things, the Israelis refuse to give to the Palestinians, and this is one of the major problems. The second problem is in early 2017, actually, the Palestinians give right to do some investigation and to give some estimation about the reserve of the natural gas in Eastern Mediterranean, mainly in Marine Gaza to one British company, and suddenly the British company, without prior notice, without any justification, left the field and they stopped all their work. This is, I don't know why. I have no explanation why, but this is a big question mark. Why the British company, without prior notice, left the field? This is, it's important. The other issue, which is, despite the fact that the members of the council, most of them Eastern Mediterranean, all the East Mediterranean except Turkey and Syria and Lebanon, of course, the Palestinian is a full member, but still full member without function, because the Palestinians' borders undefined, the reserve is not estimated, and we are worried as Palestinians, this is the point, that the Israelis is gaining time to use the reserve of the Palestinian gas in Gaza Marine. This is one of the major violation against Palestinians. To come to the land, also there is functioning well in Rantis area, and also the Palestinians has, it's in Palestinian borders, in 1967 borders, actually close to my village, and we see the fire every minute. There is going on the activities, and the Israelis, they produce oil from that well, but we don't know, and we actually we have no information about it. It's a closed, a black box. Nobody knows what's going on. The Israelis also, they do some survey till Ramallah border, eastern border, because they want to know the reserve of the Rantis field, where they call it Rantis field, the reserve of the Rantis field. Also, this information sharing with Palestinian Authority almost zero, and Palestinian Authority doesn't know anything. This is just an examples of violation of the Israelis, violation against the Palestinian natural resources, mainly hydrocarbon and gas. To come back to the issue of the Eastern Mediterranean, actually the Palestinian Authority also should be blamed, to be honest. And the Palestinian Authority, there is two options or two explanations. They keep silent, and we don't know why they keep silent. Either there is a secret agreement, or actually there is no any information available to the experts or to the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority, myself, I asked the Prime Minister, the old Prime Minister, Dr. Ramil Hamdallah, and I asked I asked the Dr. Muhammad Mustafa, who is the head of the Palestinian Investment Fund and who is responsible for this petroleum and gas file. His answer was useless because he doesn't want actually to release any information. Then to be fair and to be honest and to be objective, there is something secret we don't know as Palestinian people. And here is, we are as Palestinians and we are as experts, as civil society activists, we are suffering from lack of information from the Palestinian Authority, if they have information, and also the violation of the Israelis, and the Israelis gaining time to use the Palestinian things. The other thing also the Palestinian Authority should be blamed on, that is, despite the fact they went to and became a member of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Council, the Palestinian Authority, they don't practice their membership. They should precondition their membership to receive data and to share information with Israelis. That's also is not done by Palestinian Authority. This is also a question mark, why we became a member without function. Actually, we are there just to listen lectures and nothing else, while we are going there, or we should go there to ask Palestinian rights, even if we have no capacity to explore the oil there, or to use the oil, air, or the gas. We should protect our rights for the future generation, which is not done. Now, the problem is we have to use the political mechanisms. Egypt entered with this bilateral and multilateral agreement. Actually, all of them exclude Palestine, and this is also violation by the other members, not only by Israelis. Egypt entered with agreement with Cyprus. Egypt entered agreement with Greece. Recently, they signed the final agreement. They entered agreement with Egypt, with Israel, with Cyprus, and with Greece, and now they are trying to use some diplomatic channels to solve the problem with Turkey. And Syria, Lebanon, they trying to use different ways to protect their rights. And maybe you know that there is a mediation between Lebanon and Israel to define the borders of the Lebanese economic zone and Israeli economic zone. If I summarize my ideas, the regional arrangement and the bilateral arrangement with Palestinians and Israelis, and the weakness of the Palestinian Authority, and the violation of the Israeli side to the Palestinians, actually making the Palestinian civil society activists and experts are worrying, because we don't have any guarantee that the Israeli violation will not continue, will not gain the time, and at the end, maybe the Israelis, after 10 or 15 years, they come and they say, take your oil field or gas field, and we will discover there is no reserve there, or actually there is no gas there, because the potential, according to the international reports and scientific reports, and even some companies, oil international companies reports, roughly they say the Palestinian marine, or the Palestinian reserve in gas, it is between 15 to 20 years. That's why time is very important. Time is very important. This dimension, time dimension, is not exist in the Palestinian mind. I mean the official Palestinian mind, and at the same time used by Israeli, the time dimension used by Israelis efficiently. In a brief, the Palestinian rights in marine gas and in the land petroleum actually in danger, and the Israelis, they use it, and in my opinion, the Israelis, they are in hurry to use it. and the agreement, bilateral agreement between Israelis and some Arab countries or Mediterranean countries, and multilateral agreements are used by Israelis as an international agreement coverage to explore the Palestinian natural resources. Finally, I want to summarize to conclude with. Still, I have time, Abir?
Yes, 2 minutes.
Yeah. Finally, I want to say something about the Dead Sea. Also, there is, as I said, I'm a geologist, and in 1964, there was a German mission came to Palestine during Jordanian time, and they did the geological and geophysical survey, and they said there is a potentiality to have oil in around the Dead Sea, and also there is some minerals can be commercial minerals in Khan al-Ahmar areas, especially chromium and the Dead Sea potassium, and this is nothing done. And the Israelis yearly they export around $400 million from the minerals of the Dead Sea, and the potassium company of the Israel also they export around 100 million a year. This is doesn't take into consideration the Palestinian rights in the Dead Sea, while the Jordanians and the Israelis they have potassium company, and the Israelis also they use the all kinds of salts from the Dead Sea. Very briefly, the last golden minute, I want to say is the problem is, and the lobbying and advocacy of experts and NGOs and activists should be focused on Israeli violation to the Palestinian current rights and the future generation rights. And also we should keep pressure on the Palestinian authority to say something why they are keep silent and they don't put efforts to protect the Palestinian rights. And also we should coordinate our efforts with other activists and civil society and experts in Arab countries, especially in Egypt, to help Palestinians to protect their rights. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Awad, for your presentation. And now Naomi Kreitman from Gastivists will present us and will clarify as the international environmental activists why the two energy projects of common interest of the EU should be stopped. Naomi Kreitman is an organizer at the Gastivists collective. She grew up in London and now lives in Amsterdam with family and roots from many places. The Gastivists support the movement against gas, focusing on the power of grassroots groups for over a year. They have been working on the Mid-East pipeline, the Eastmed pipeline. Sorry. So
I hope Naomi, I didn't violate your presentation by doing some information from my side.
No, not at all. I think it's very interesting to have different perspectives.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for the introduction, and so nice to be here with you all tonight. I've got a presentation, so I'm gonna share my screen.
Good.
Does it work? Can you
Yes.
see the first slide of the presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so yes, I work in the Gastivists collective. We're a small group, and we started in Europe. Still, most of us are based in Europe, and we focus on trying to stop new gas projects from being built. And so we focus, when it's about projects, it's projects that are in Europe, maybe also in other places, or we work with allies outside Europe when it's to do with the accountability of banks, companies, politicians that are based in Europe. that are complicit in terrible projects and human rights abuses outside of Europe. And the Gastivists started because globally we're seeing a boom of new gas infrastructure, new projects being planned, being built, a lot of money and public money going into new gas projects. The fossil fuel industry is feeling a lot of pressure to move away from oil and coal, and so is holding on to gas as its lifeline, saying it's cleaner, it's better, but actually it's just damaging in a different way. And all over the world, we're seeing that the same issues of human rights abuses, corruption, land grabbing, and so on that we see in typical extractivist projects. It's the same for gas projects. And so we really see it as a distraction from, and that it gets in the way of the just energy transition to the energy justice that we need. And so I'll be talking a bit about why we opposed gas projects. I'm going to focus on the Eastmed pipeline and a bit about international solidarity and how we work. So the Eastmed pipeline is a huge new project, and it's planned. No construction has started yet. The aim is to take gas from the Israeli-controlled Leviathan gas fields through Cyprus, through Crete, through Greece to Italy for a European market. And it would be one of the longest in the world and reportedly the deepest, and going through a very geologically sensitive area, and also a very biodiverse area. And it would be very, very expensive. It would cost about 6 billion euro. And as Abir said, this project is benefiting from EU support, a lot of political support. This map shows gas projects on the projects of common interest list, which for anyone who doesn't know is a mechanism of the EU to give priority status to energy projects. So they get access to public money, and they get they're allowed to skip some regulation hurdles that other projects have to go through, and it makes it much more attractive to private investors. And there's also the Eurasia interconnector, I think many of you work on and know about, is also benefits from the same PCI, projects of common interest status, but I'll be focusing on the Eastmed pipeline. So how do they sell it? How does the industry and politicians sell this pipeline and similar projects? They say it's clean and green and better for the climate. They say it's good for energy security. This term is thrown around a lot. And they say that it's good for peace building in the Eastern Mediterranean region. And all of these reasons are, they're not true. And I'll go through each one to explain a bit why and what the truth is behind these projects, and that actually these projects are just to keep the fossil fuel empire running, they're to keep the current powers in place, and to retain this super capitalist, extractivist fossil fuel system rolling. So first, climate and environment. So industry says that gas is better for the climate than oil and coal because less CO2 is emitted when it's burnt. However, still, when you burn gas, about half the amount of CO2 is emitted as with oil and coal. So it's still a huge amount of CO2. And moreover, gas is 99% methane, which is a supercharged greenhouse gas. In the short term, it heats the climate 84 times as much as CO2, and then it degrades into CO2. So it becomes CO2 later anyway, and in the 12 years that it exists in our atmosphere, it is incredibly warming. So we feel a very, it's a supercharged climate heating gas, and methane leaks all along the supply chain. So when it's extracted from the ground, when it's transported, and it's every time there's a new study on methane leaks, it shows that there are more leaks than we thought before. So it's not a climate solution, and it's just damaging in a different way to oil and coal. And then the impacts on environment are also very aggressive. Often very aggressive chemicals are used to extract gas, which flow into water supplies. Near gas infrastructure, there's air pollution. It makes cracking the ground, makes the risk of earthquakes more dangerous, and ecosystems are disturbed, and the air pollution, the water pollution can have very serious health impacts on communities living nearby. Then moving on to the second argument for building infrastructure like the Eastmed pipeline is energy security. And this is really, the EU Commission loves to say this when they want to build a massive new pipeline. Usually with the story of we're scared that Russia will turn off the taps. However, studies show that Europe already has more than enough gas infrastructure. There's terminals for liquid gas and other pipelines that are underused. And there's a very good study, I can share the link later, that proves even if Russia turns off the taps, there's enough pipelines, even if we need to get gas from somewhere else. Secondly, fossil fuels are not secure. Just maybe you've seen in the news in the last 2 days, for many, many reasons, there's now a fossil gas crisis in Europe, in the UK especially, for multiple reasons. But as long as it's centralized in a few aggressive companies that don't care about people, and as long as we have this system that's not about distributing energy, about energy efficiency, and about communities owning their right to energy, as long as it's this system, more gas isn't going to make us more secure. And that leads me to the question, with this argument of energy security, whose security do they mean? It's not the security of communities, of marginalized people. It's the security of geopolitical interest and the security of profit for massive energy giants. So the last reason that is used to promote gas in the Eastern Mediterranean is that it's a solution for peacekeeping. Here's a picture of, of the prior Prime Minister of Israel, the Cypriot Prime Minister, and Greek Prime Minister, saying that gas in the region will be a catalyst for peace, stability, and cooperation. And for many, many reasons, we know this isn't true. So Turkey, and so first, this pipeline will, of course, sorry, I'll go back for a moment. This pipeline and getting a secure EU market for Israeli-controlled gas will benefit the Israeli regime financially. It'll give them political leverage because the EU will become dependent on them for gas. And it legitimizes the apartheid, the human rights abuses. And it's total hypocrisy on the side of the EU with their EU Human Rights Convention. It's a hypocrisy that we've been trying to flag in our campaigning. Next, having a pipeline through this region incentivizes drilling in the waters, the disputed waters between Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus. And already, I think either 2 summers ago, there were some vessels colliding in an escalation over these disputed economic waters. And in Cyprus, it threatens the fragile peacekeeping between the northern and southern Cypriot communities. And these energy projects are very intertwined with militarization. There was a bill, a piece of US legislation passed in 2019, in which they give support in the same deal to this pipeline, other gas projects in the region. I believe the Eurasia interconnector, but I'm not 100%, And in the same deal, they promised to give naval training exercises, drone training exercises, and other security, but militarization aid to Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. So here we see how the military complex is super tied up with these new gas projects, and also how international it is with the EU supporting it and the US supporting it. And so that leads me into a lot of the work the Gastivists do. And what we try to do is connect people internationally to identify points along the chain of a project like the Eastmed pipeline, to work together, to hold actors like the EU, the members of European Parliament in different European countries accountable for voting on such projects, while having a very different narrative on human rights. Here's a little chart of the companies involved in the pipeline, French, Italian interests there, Greek, there's more Italian companies, there's Shell, US involved in drilling in the region. And so what we're trying to do is connect people, get people to know and see what actions we can do in solidarity with one another. And yeah, so we wrote a report last year about the Eastmed pipeline. It's available in Arabic and Turkish, Greek, Hebrew, Italian. I don't remember if I said that already, that you're welcome to read. I'll share it maybe in the chat. We've got a petition for the next vote. The EU Commission, members of European Parliament will vote in December, I believe, on this priority status for projects like the Eastmed pipeline and the Eurasia interconnector. And so in this petition, we highlight this hypocrisy with human rights and legitimizing apartheid and things like this. So I'll share the petition too. And if you want to join our meetings and are interested to have ideas, we'd be really happy to connect. And here is our email address. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you very much for the full image that you presented in your presentation, and the environmental impact of the proposed projects, mainly the Eastmed pipeline. Thank you for your presentation. Really, it was very useful. And now we will go to Dr. Susan Power. Susan Power is the head of legal research and advocacy at Al-Haq. She lectured the law for 7 years in Ireland between 2012 and 2017. So please, Dr. Susan, please go ahead.
That's great. Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. And I think I just shared a PowerPoint as well, just making sure that everyone can see that also. Fantastic. Thanks very much. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, and to the other presenters as well, and for, I think, a really important event to connect everybody on the issues in relation to hydrocarbons off the coast of Palestine. And today I'm going to present on the Eurasia interconnector, and just quite narrowly in relation to gas and the Eurasia interconnector. So I'm going to look at 2 seconds there now. So I'm just going to look at links between gas resources off the coast of Palestine and the Eurasia interconnector, while highlighting as well Israel's attacks on Palestinian fishermen to protect the gas supply for the electricity market. We'll also look at the conversion of gas to electricity in the Asherot settlement, and the legal implications of this for the EU project of common interest, the Eurasia interconnector. So what's outside the scope of the presentation today are some elements. I'll touch on them very briefly, but won't go into any depth. Is the supply of electricity from settlement solar panels in the Jordan Valley. We won't really look at the discriminatory allocation of electricity to forced transfer, or the supply of settlements from the electricity grid, and land appropriations for electricity infrastructure. So that would be in more depth for another time. But I suppose the best way to start is with an initial explanation of what the Eurasia interconnector is. So the Eurasia interconnector is referred to as an electricity highway. So it'll effectively link the electricity grids of Israel, including the Israeli settlements, to Europe through Cyprus and then onto Greece. And it will provide for electricity to the European market. And there are essentially two legs of this project. The first one is from Israel to Cyprus, and the second one then is from Cyprus and onto Greece. So first we'll look at the role of the Israel Electric Corporation and its control over the Israel electrical grid. So the Israel Electrical Corporation was previously known as the Palestine Electricity Corporation Limited, and it is the main supplier of electrical power in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. So basically builds, maintains and operates power generation stations, substations, as well as the transmission and distribution networks within Israel and the settlements. And I suppose most importantly for us, it is on the steering committee of the Eurasia interconnector. So quite importantly, the Israel Electric Corporation controls the electricity grid in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. And we could say that this grid in itself is one integrated and inseparable unit by its design. So the control of the electrical grid is really key to Israel's colonization of Palestine. So in 1967, following the beginning of the occupation, Israel took control over Palestine's electricity grid and integrated it into the Israeli system. And this is an action when in and of itself violated Article 43 and Article 55 of the Hague Regulations, which prohibits the alienation of public and movable property of the occupied territory. You can see in the photographs here that the Israel Electric Corporation substation is located outside Mal Abdulmim settlement. And you can see in the darker picture here, the main transmission voltage lines, which cut right across the West Bank, Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip as part of the electricity grid. Then after 1973, Israel required Palestinian electricity companies to connect to the Israeli electricity grid. And it basically forced them to purchase electricity from Israel, basically making Palestine nearly completely energy dependent on Israel as a form of corporate capture. So how does this all work? Well, the gas from Israel's offshore gas fields is converted into energy through 4 different stations. And these are owned by the Israel Electric Corporation. It's transmitted onto the grid through substations and transmitters. So our first point of call when examining Israel's gas infrastructure is the Tamar field. So the Tamar field is basically central to Israel's domestic gas supply. So this delivers gas onshore via a 150-kilometer tieback, and this is between the Tamar platform and the Mari B storage facility. And you can see the proximity of the Mari B field to Gaza on the grey map here. It's basically about 13 nautical miles from the Gaza coast. So the gas is then piped from the Tamar platform to the Ashdod onshore terminal, and the gas condensate is sold via the Israel natural gas line system to the Israeli domestic market. And the gas is sold mainly to electricity producers, such as the Israel Electric Corporation and industrial consumers in Israel, the occupied Palestinian territory and the settlements as the main energy production source. In its 2014 report, the Israel Electric Corporation stated that approximately 98.6% of the natural gas that serves the company for the generation of electricity is supplied from to the company from the Tamar gas field. So it gives us some sort of significance. It gives us a taste of the significance of the Tamar field. What is important here is that the main gas storage facility for the Tamar field is the Mari B gas facility, and that's the one that's 13 nautical miles from the Gaza coast. And this is an integral and pivotal part of Israel's domestic gas infrastructure. There is a single pipeline which is used for Israel's gas transportation system, and Israel's domestic electricity production is largely dependent on this. And you can see this pipeline, it's linking the Mari B and Tamar gas platforms to the shore in the picture. So securing the Mari B is really vital for Israel's interests. And the chair of the Israel Electric Corporation has also stated that any interference with the orderly supply of gas would pose a grave challenge to the production system. So what is really important for our purposes is that Israel secures these platforms by maintaining a 7 nautical mile security perimeter around them. And this includes the closure and military security of the closed sea area by the Israeli Navy. So currently the sea is limited to Palestinian fishermen to approximately an area of 6 nautical miles. And this leaves a 7 nautical mile security ring to protect the platforms and the pipeline infrastructure. A lieutenant colonel in the Israeli Navy described to the Israeli newspaper Globes that the Navy's attacks on Palestinian fishermen who live near the gas platforms, who fish near the gas platforms. And he said that vessels that approach within 7 miles of the platforms would be intercepted by one of the Navy's patrol boats. The intruder will be ordered to leave, and if it refuses, warning shots will be fired. And this happens on a daily basis because Palestinian fishermen like to insist on their right to fish wherever they feel like it. So there is an admission of indiscriminate attacks on civilian Palestinian fishermen who fish near the platforms. Between 2017 and 2018 alone, Al-Haq documented the killing of 6 Palestinian fishermen by Israeli naval forces. And this year, OCHA documented the Israeli firing warning shots at Palestinian boats. So in January, there was 84 warning shots, in February, 58, and there was 55 warning instances in March. So the Eurasia interconnector is effectively receiving gas through pipelines from an area which Israel holds under naval blockade and is therefore under an international armed conflict, where Israel routinely targets civilian Palestinian fishermen, which are acts in contravention of basic principles of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including the right to life, the prohibition of ill treatment and punishment, and the prohibition of collective punishment amongst other rights. So not only does Israel close and militarize Palestine Sea to secure gas distribution for conversion to electricity, Israel has also depleted Palestine's gas resources. In 2011, Israel unilaterally depleted gas from Palestine's contiguous border field, also known as the Noah field, and this was converted to electricity to supply the domestic market. So why did Israel do this? In 2011, there were serious disruptions to Israel's gas imports from Egypt following an attack in the Sinai on the pipeline. And there was a decision politically to rapidly extract and wind up the Yam Tethys field, which contains the Noah and the Mari B reservoirs. So in 2011, the media reported that there really needed to be a joint cooperation agreement for the development of the Noah gas well, and there was indications at this time that it might be forthcoming between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli authorities, but there was no cooperation agreement for the development of the gas. However, in its 2011 annual report, Delek Group, one of the operators, reported that it had developed the Noah North field. Then in the 2012 annual report, Delek Drilling indicated that exploratory wells had been drilled in the Noah holdings, Noah and Noah South 1, and it highlighted the discovery of commercial quantities of gas. Noble Energy, one of the other operators on the field, then confirmed in their 2012 annual report that during 2011, due to unexpected natural gas supply disruptions into Israel, we decided to develop Noah and Noah South. So it must be emphasized that such acts of depleting Palestine's natural gas resources are absolutely prohibited under international humanitarian law as acts amounting to war crimes of pillage and for which there is individual criminal liability. It must also be noted that Derek Group is already listed on the UN database of companies that are illegally active in the Israeli settlements. So electricity is then generated from the gas, which is supplied by the Israel Electric Corporation to Israel, Israeli settlements, and Palestinian areas. And the Asherot Industrial Zone is one such settlement area. So Asherot, as many know here, lies close to the Clandia checkpoint, which is, and it is located on Al-Ram, Beit Hanina, and Dayat al-Barid village lands. And the annexation wall cuts off the villages from the village lands. The Israel Electric Corporation operates a substation and gas turbines at the Asherot Industrial Zone. The Israel Electric Corporation describes the land as being leased from the Israel Land Authority until 2022, and there is plans to extend the lease for another 49 years. So here we see that the gas is converted to electricity in an Israeli settlement on appropriated Palestinian land in the West Bank, and this directly will service the Eurasia interconnector. So what is the impact of this on the Palestinian population? So despite the presence of massive gas fields in close proximity to the Gaza coast, Israel inflicts darkness on the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Electricity Distribution Company, GEDCO, is responsible for the distribution of electricity inside the Gaza Strip. However, the Gaza power plant was developed to run off gas, but to date, Israel has systematically prevented the development of Palestinian gas off the Gaza coast, such as the Gaza Marine Field, which holds a substantial 1 trillion cubic feet of gas, which could power the whole of Gaza and also be used for gas export as well. But currently, the power plant is run off diesel, which is less efficient, and Israel controls the supply of diesel for the power plant, controlling its transit through the Israeli checkpoints into the Gaza Strip. Since 2008, Israel has reduced electricity in Gaza and reduced the supply of industrial diesel fuel for the power plant, resulting in local disconnections and power outages. And this has affected the vital infrastructure, such as hospitals, water and sewage systems, and denials of basic infrastructure for the survival of the civilian population. Israel has also targeted the electricity infrastructure in its military offensives, for example, in 2006, targeting and bombing the electrical grid. The chronic electricity and fuel shortages in the Gaza Strip are linked to damage from the damage to the Israeli grid lines from military offensives over the past 10 years. Then in the West Bank and Jerusalem, Palestinian electricity companies such as GEDCO are prevented from increasing the capacity of electricity in the West Bank due to technical and operational limitations imposed by Israel. The Director General of the Jerusalem Electricity Company, Saeed Hisham Omar, said in an interview with Al-Haq how the majority of the power line malfunctions are actually located inside Israel on lines that are leading into the West Bank, but the Israeli authorities are not fixing the malfunctions, and they're also prohibiting access of the Palestinian crews to these areas. Also, GEDCO has been forced to supply the military administration in Bet El. The military camp gets electricity from GEDCO and pays the bill to the Israel Electric Corporation, who in turn deducts the consumption from GEDCO. There's no money for this transaction, and GEDCO are left with no option but to supply the electricity. So throughout the West Bank, Israel also denies electricity as a coercive environment to force the transfer of Palestinian communities who live near settlements in acts of ongoing settler colonization. So by connecting Israel's electricity grid to the Eurasia interconnector, European states risk breaching the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334 obligation to distinguish in their relevant dealings between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. So by connecting the Eurasia interconnector to Israel's electricity grid, Europe will be supplied by gas, which transits through pipelines and infrastructure that is held under military blockade and the closure of the Gaza coast, and where Palestinian civilian fishermen are targeted daily and in some cases killed. Europe will be directly supplied by electricity that has been converted from gas inside Israel's illegal industrial settlements and has even previously been extracted from Palestine's own gas fields. And Europe will also be profiting from a discriminatory gas distribution system from the occupied Palestinian territory amounting to apartheid. Israel's settlement policy and practices also constitute serious violations of peremptory norms, foremost the prohibition of the permanent acquisition of territory by force and the denial of the Palestinian right to self-determination, along with violating international humanitarian law and international human rights law in acts which amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, which are under the investigation of the International Criminal Court. The EU project of common interest also breaches the EU Commission's own binding guidelines, which provide that no EU financial support can be granted to activities, projects, and operations of Israeli entities taking place partially or entirely in the occupied Palestinian territory. And as such, the EU, by entertaining this agreement, is in breach of its own internal regulations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Susan, for the important topics that you have raised in your presentation. Thank you very much. And now I would like to thank all the speakers about their presentation. Then we will go ahead and take some time for questions. So please, if anyone has any question, please put it in the chat box. Are there any questions? So Naomi shared the petition and the links that she mentioned before. And also during this project, we've worked on producing a film about the energy annexation also, and about the two energy projects, which is in the list of common interest of the EU. And I will share with you all these materials. The link of the film I will send you. It will be uploaded on Penguin website and also on the social media. And I will share it to your emails. And also during this project, we've worked on infographics and fact sheets related to this issue and other environmental violations in Palestine. So we will share these materials with you by email later. Anyone has any question?
Yeah, Abir, I have a suggestion, Abir.
Yes, please.
First of all, thanks for Dr. Suzanne and Naomi for actually enriched my knowledge. I have a suggestion. Naomi said there is 3 claims raised by others about the whole issue, that is green and clean, security and peace. That's right, Naomi? Yeah, I think if Penguin or other, I don't know, if we go to these 3 things and write papers on it in details to undermining the claims from others, and to put facts and argument about these 3 claims, and to produce policy brief or counter paper, I don't know what to call it, but these 3 items, I think it's important to be explained in depth and in details to clarify what does mean peace, which is no peace actually from this kind of projects, and it's no clear, as Naomi said, no clean and green energy and no security. If we see what's going on the Eastern Mediterranean between Turkey and other countries, between Lebanon and Israel. Security is not there, and this can be a route or a platform for new wars in the Eastern Mediterranean. What's going on now is Cold War, but maybe it will be other kind of wars. I think this is a good idea if we can work on these three items in details in cooperation with Heinrich Böll or other organization, or even at minimum level in Palestinian context. What does mean security? What does mean peace? And what does mean green and clean energy? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abed. And one of the points that are raised here, also how the EU commit with the Paris Agreement and support like these dirty energy. How the EU will commit with the Green Deal and the other climate commitments, and in the same time they will and they are supporting like these dirty energy. So what's the position of the EU Parliament in regarding to this? Because the EU has strongly committed with the Paris Agreement in order to increase their dependence on clean energy source, and in the same time they increase the dirty energy EU dependence. Another question here from Mozambique, Ilham from Mozambique. What is the movement about gas in Palestine position on what should happen with this gas when it is under Palestinian control? Should this be left underground or exploited as Israelis do among the Palestinian public on this? Let me answer this question on behalf of Pengon as environmental organization. We are promoting to increase the dependence on clean energy source. Our position in relation to using the dirty source, which is gas, is keep it under the ground from environmental position. And we are working, currently we are working on increasing Palestinian dependence on clean energy source, mainly solar energy. Especially Palestine is under occupation and there is a lot of restrictions on electrical or energy supply, mainly in Gaza and also in some communities in West Bank, like Jordan Valley. So currently we are focusing on increasing dependence on clean energy source in Palestine. And I will give the floor to the speakers if they have any intervention to speak.
Sure, I'd like to answer.
Okay.
Thank you. So there's this question about how do these fossil fuel infrastructure projects contradict the EU's Green New Deal and climate commitments? Yeah, new fossil gas infrastructure, there's no space for it within the climate targets of the Paris Climate Accord. And the latest IPCC report was stronger on methane than previous publications. So that's the consensus is getting there about fossil gas. The industry is so good at their lobbying and creative storytelling that now there's a new story of, okay, we'll build these pipelines like the Eastmed, and first fossil gas will flow, but later we'll use renewables to create hydrogen gas, and then that will flow. However, what we're seeing now is that the hydrogen energy, so you need energy to make hydrogen gas. And so hypothetically that could be made with renewables. Right now, most of the hydrogen gas is being made with fossil fuels. Like they'll use coal to create hydrogen, make it flow through a pipeline, but because hypothetically you could create hydrogen with renewables, they say, oh, but it's clean. And it also makes no sense. Why would you build? So they're saying, for example, the Eastmed, oh, but in a few years we can flow hydrogen gas through it. But there's no reason you'd build like the deepest pipeline in the world, super long, right from the massive Leviathan gas field, if actually you were planning to put hydrogen through it. Also, the hydrogen production, could be much more local. There's no reason to send it all that way. So it's incompatible, but the industry are very creative and we have new stories to fight all the time. And then there was another question about why hasn't it made waves so far? Yeah, I think it's quite, for example, well, to speak for the Eastmed pipeline, we've been doing workshops and trainings with a similar presentation to what I did today for about a year, and with people in Cyprus, people in Italy, also international audiences. So people, it's slow work, but I think it's building. And it's also, I think with the Nord Stream comparison, Nord Stream, I believe, is almost completely built, and these projects are much more in their early stages. So I think it captures people more. And especially, you mentioned Germany. I think there's a big anxiety of how to talk about Israel and Palestine in European movements. We organized an event with other Palestinian allies from Stop the Wall a few months ago, and also with an anti-occupation activist from Tel Aviv, Israel, and worked on it a lot together. And people from, actually German people from the European climate movement called us anti-Semitic for doing that, when the team, there were Israelis and Jewish people in the organizing team, and we took a lot of care. But it showed to us there is a lot of anxiety about how to work on this issue in the European climate movement. So that, along with the project being in a much earlier stage, this I see as why it hasn't caught on, and that people don't know about it as much as other projects like the Nord Stream.
Thank you, Naomi. And there is also another question about did any of the existing planned Israeli fossil fuel projects conducted an environmental impact assessment on the Palestinian part? How can this impact its finance sponsorship? From the speakers who can answer, who would like to answer this question about if any of the proposed projects, if they conducted any environmental impact assessment.
I don't think so.
A small environmental concern about the Eastmed, the pipeline, and its impact on the sensitivity of the area. It will increase the earthquake in the area in its route between Israel to Europe. And from environmental angle also, it will increase the dependence on a fossil fuel energy source, and it's a dirty energy source, so it will increase the emissions. So it will increase the impact of the climate change, not decrease the impact. So, but I think there is no environmental impact assessment studies. But we have a position paper about our environmental concern in relation to these two projects. And please, Dr. Susan, if you want to clarify more.
Thanks. Sorry, I forgot to do. There was an environmental impact assessment which was carried out for the Tamimi field. So it's quite a large, it was quite a substantial assessment which was carried out a few years ago. But it didn't take into consideration any of the issues around Gaza, or take into consideration the impact on the Palestinian communities. So it was only it cut off at the it cut off at the border. So it was very problematic because there's obviously the military security area, which comes into the Palestinian maritime zone, and also the impact on the overfishing in the area because of the closure, and many other issues around even environmental pollution and pollution with seeping, the gas leakages as well from the fields. But none of this was taken into consideration in relation to like the impact on Gaza, which is particularly problematic, and none of the, in relation to the gas fields and the main actors like Noble Energy and Delek Drilling, there has been no consideration of the impact on Palestine. In relation to the, and this is just from the impact assessments I've read from the companies which were drafted for the companies themselves.
And thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any questions? No. So at the end, I hope that this online panel meets your expectation in addressing Israel's theft and exploitation of Palestinian natural resources, mainly gas, and how Israelis' practices violate the international human rights and the humanitarian law, how it denied the Palestinian sovereignty right on their natural or on our natural resources, mainly gas. Also, this panel raised the two energy proposed projects that connect Europe with Israel and supply Europe with energy by Israel, which is a Eurasia interconnector and the Eastmed pipeline. And we've raised how EU, by supporting these two projects, will increase their dependence on fossil fuel, and putting the EU into question on the ability to meet its climate targets. And also by supporting these two projects, how EU put themselves in a hook in Israel's violation of international law. So at the end, I would like to thank all the speakers who joined us in this panel. Many thanks for your presentation. It was really great and powerful for all of us. Thank you all for your participation and joining this panel. As I said, we will share all the materials that we've worked on in cooperation with Henrichville Palestine and Jordan office. And I appreciate your joining and your participation here. Thank you again for joining us today, and we will see you in the next webinars or next panels in order to discuss other environmental issues. Thank you very much.
Do you allow me to add a sentence?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I also want, on behalf of Heinrich Böll Foundation, really thank the speakers and also the participants. I found this was really such an interesting evening. For me, many new things, of course, not for the experts in the panel, but for me it was horrifying on one hand and also very interesting. And I want to take up Abedelrahman's proposal that we should continue working on this. And I really think we want to do this. Nidal is also nodding. So I unfortunately will be leaving Palestine soon, but I think this will be a great topic for us to continue. Also my successor, I'm very certain, will want to work on this topic. So let's keep on working on this. This is a very important topic, and take it over into the next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.